Let's see if you're smart. Watch this and then see if you can answer a question. Okay, so here's the question. Did the balls move at random? And before you answer, I mean truly random. Did the balls pick any arbitrary direction on their own? Or did they perhaps follow a path that was determined by some sort of a guiding principle? And I'll give you a hint. It's a discipline, and its name starts with phys and ends with ix. If you said their path was determined by laws of physics, you would be correct. Congratulations. But here's another question. If I could replicate the conditions of the break perfectly, say I built some sort of a machine that could put every molecule of every ball right back in its place, if I could set the temperature of the air in the room, the intensity at which the cue ball is struck, if I could do that whole thing over and over again, that would be a boring video. But do you think that the balls would end up in exactly the same spot? No, right? I'm messing with you. Yes, of course, it would be crazy if they didn't. The pool balls are a great way to demonstrate a very simple truth about the universe. Everything there ever was, and still is made up of particles that behave according to very universal laws. Or as a scientist might put it, the balls ended up where they did, right down to the width of an atom, because the state of the matter that they're made of and the energies acting upon them brought them to exactly where they ended up. Well, a few years ago I thought, well, wait a minute, isn't the whole universe just like a big pool table? Isn't everything made of fields and particles continuously exchanging energies according to very rigid laws of physics? I mean, our brains are made of the same boring carbon and oxygen and hydrogen and stuff. So every new connection made between neurons, every firing of a synapse, every electrical signal sent within our brains, just like balls on a pool table, these are all inevitable outcomes of the physics which govern the atoms that make up those neurons. No single particle that makes me or you or Scarlett Johansson will ever act in a way that is not ruled by nature. So how is it that this pile of meat can suddenly make choices that are truly its own? How is it that you and I have free will? Wait, how do we know that we do have free will? We do know that we do. Do we? Free will seems obvious to you and I. Of course, I can make a choice. I can choose whether or not I'm going to put on Billie Eilish or Tom Waits right now. But how do I know that it was truly I who made that choice? Our brains are so complex, will take decades or even centuries to fully understand. But one thing that we learned is that this wonderful mass that we happily store in our craniums is fundamentally subject to laws of nature. It does what it does because each and every atom that makes it does the only thing that it can do at that moment. Each thought and action and emotion at its core is a result of matter doing its thing, following a path of least resistance. So if the physics were at the helm, controlling what each atom would do when, then choosing Billy was the only possible outcome of my attempt to make a choice, whether I knew it or not. It's almost as if free will is an illusion that we believe in because we're aware of our decisions, but not of the underlying processes that govern them. This realization hit me like a bowl of cold borscht on a drizzly Monday morning. On the one hand, I knew we have free will. We are thinking, reasoning human beings. We're capable of joy and sadness and love. We can go to space and make cheesecake and YouTube videos because we decide to. On the other hand, a bunch of billiard balls has never decided to get together and start a reggae band. So how free will comes out of just a bunch of atoms doing their shtick seemed like a good place to start this channel. So welcome to No Borscht For You. If this is the first video of mine that you're watching, this is the first video of mine that I'm making, at least in this series. But I do feel a sense of kinship already, so let's get started. As much as I'd like to take the credit, the thought that we might not have free will because the universe is deterministic is actually not my idea. At least I'm not the first one who came up with it. This is a debate that started, well, a couple of years ago, some 2,600 of them, give or take. The idea is called determinism because it claims that all events in the universe are completely determined by previously existing causes. Kind of like what we just saw a few minutes ago. The universe plays out according to its rules and there's just no wiggle room. So naturally, the first stop for me was to figure out if there is wiggle room. Is there anything in the universe that behaves in a non-deterministic way? And it turns out there is. We do have truly random events. Einstein actually hated those, and he was fighting them tooth and nail. But Einstein also hated mosquitoes. Probably. Well, maybe not, but it's a pretty solid bet. And mosquitoes do exist. Probably. Well, maybe not, but that too is a pretty solid bet. Anyway, the world turned out to be, at its core, indeterministic because of quantum physics. Could there be a relationship between quantum physics and free will? In the 19th century, many philosophers felt that free will was an illusion. They were led to this conclusion because the pace of discovery in classical physics was promising we would pretty soon unlock all of nature's secrets. This was, after all, the century where we discovered the atom, electromagnetism, X-rays, Eiffel Tower. It was right in the middle of Paris, somewhat baffling, nobody noticed it before. But with each and every discovery, we were confirming the assumption that if you knew the position and velocity of every particle, you could theoretically predict the next state of matter, and then the next, and then the next, and so on into the future. The fact that such calculation was impractical was beside the point. The universe was unfolding in a predictable way, which made the existence of free will an impossibility. In 1839, a German philosopher, Arthur Schopenhauer, presented an essay to the Royal Norwegian Society of Science, and in it he argued against the freedom of the will by essentially saying that we're just like a ball on a pool table, or perhaps this Rubik's Cube right here. Not this very Rubik's Cube, but he was essentially saying that we only act when we feel compelled to. According to him, when you or I think about our actions, we feel that we can do whatever we want, so as long as there's nothing preventing us from doing so. But Schopenhauer claimed that this is merely a physical freedom, because, and I quote, "You can do what you will, but in any given moment of your life, you can only will one definitive thing and absolutely nothing beyond that one thing." What Schopenhauer is essentially saying is, if you were able to recreate a universe exactly as it was just before I picked Billie Eilish, or in essence, if you could rewind time, could I have ever picked Tom Waits? Schopenhauer says that since I could see the options before me, but not the underlying processes of the decision making, it feels that the choice was made by my conscious mind. To say that I could have chosen Tom Waits after the choice had been made is merely an illusion. In fact, Arthur Schopenhauer was convinced of that the illusion of free will is, well, an illusion. Explains why virtually every portrait we have of him shows him looking Schopenhaueriously peeved. But with the discovery of quantum physics, the premise on which his idea was built, the idea that every individual particle behaves in a very predictable way, was actually shown to be incorrect. Quantum physics is the physics of the world at the very small level. And at this level, the world behaves in ways that are as foreign to us as Serbian folk music. We today know, why am I talking like this? We today know that identical particles with identical states can, and in fact do, behave in different ways. If our billiard balls were photons about to strike a surface of the glass, one might choose to get absorbed,
choose. One might end up bouncing off the surface, and the third one might go right through it. Even if they all hit the glass at the exact same spot, while we can predict the ratio of different behaviors for a whole whack of balls, their individual behavior is hopelessly random. So much so, in fact, that if you could rewind time, for all we know, you might even see different outcomes for the same ball.
Not only that, but as far as we can tell, our neural synapses exhibit the same random behavior. Now, our neurons, when completely isolated and stimulated with electric current in a petri dish, they behave 100% predictably. For a given amount of electric current, a neuron will always respond the same way, without a fail. But the synapses behave very differently. Now, synapses are connections between neurons. They allow neurons to pass information between each other, and they do that by releasing neurotransmitters across a tiny gap. Now, the word synapse comes from Greek synapsis, meaning conjunction, and the amount of neurotransmitters that gets transmitted across this conjunction can't be correlated to any input in a lab. For example, in an experiment, scientists would repeat the exact same stimulation to a neuron, but it would release different amounts of neurotransmitters across this gap. Now, they may very well be a future where we might say, aha, here's what controls the synapses, and we figure it all out. It may be that we determine that synapses also behave in a deterministic way. But as far as we can tell, they seem to be acting in ways that we can only describe as random. They may even be influenced by quantum events. But if sources of my decisions are random triggers, either in the synapses or in the world of quantum physics, how can I be considered to have free will? If I chose Billie Eilish because of some random event acting upon my neurons, then that really wasn't my choice. Quantum physics, or indeterminism, is clearly not the answer. Would the existence of something like a soul explain the origin of free will? As an agnostic, I am open to the possibility of the existence of the soul. Not the Korean capital, I'm fairly convinced that one does exist. I'm talking about the theological, immortal soul, if you will. Now, these days we can demonstrate that neuron impulses that generate decisions can be observed moments before the decision comes into our conscious awareness. How do we know this? Benjamin Libet, a researcher in the field of human consciousness, believed that free will exists, and he wanted to record an exact moment an act of free will takes place. He knew from experiments done decades earlier that there's a period of about 550 milliseconds, about half a second, between the brain activity in the motor cortex, which initiates any sort of a limb movement, and the limb movement itself. Now, this was measured by German scientists in the 60s. They hooked up a bunch of participants to an EEG machine, which recorded the gradual buildup of activity in the motor cortex, and an EMG, which recorded the movement itself. They instructed their participants to move their wrists whenever they felt like it during the experiment, and essentially measured the time that it takes for a signal to travel from brain to wrist. Libet's idea was to determine the time between the decision to move the wrist and subsequent motor cortex activity buildup, and this is how he set up his experiment. He hooked up his participants the same way the Germans did decades earlier, only he also got them to watch a dial that would display a rapidly changing sequence of numbers. He asked them to move whenever they felt like it, but to remember the number displayed at the exact moment they got the urge to move. If you were to plot this on a timeline, it would look something like this. Experiment starts, and at some point the participant decides to act. This is mentally recorded by the participant watching the dial and later reported to the experimenter. Immediately after that, the motor cortex starts building up the necessary trigger and then sends the signal to the muscle. Shortly after that, the EMG records the movement. The experiment is then repeated up to 40 times for each participant to rule out any errors. Except this was not what the result was. Instead, the timeline looks something like this. Experiment starts, And at some point, the motor cortex starts building the activity to move a muscle. And then, some 350 milliseconds later, the participant becomes aware of the desire to move a muscle, as noted by reporting the correspondent number on a dial, and then the signal finally arrives at the limb. I know the fact that somebody came up with an idea to test something like this is a testament to human curiosity. But the net result was that we have experimental evidence that a decision to act is not an act of the agent of free will or the conscious mind. It's initiated by the subconscious, and it takes a full third of a second for us to even become aware of it. This experiment was challenged, repeated, and then confirmed in independent studies since Libet. Not only that, but today, a computer learning algorithm can observe this brain activity and learn to accurately predict our decision to move before we know we're about to do it. Michael Stevens from Vsauce made a great video about it in his YouTube Red series called Minefield. I suggest you watch it. I'll put the link in the description. Some researchers have even demonstrated an amazing ability to predict with fantastic accuracy which specific choices subjects are going to make moments before they become aware of their choices. We may feel like we made a conscious choice, but even the idea of that feeling can be traced to a moment before we become aware of it. So what does any of this have to do with the soul? Well, findings like these present a problem for the hypothesis that it is a soul that acts as an agent of free will. If the soul is what makes our choices, then it's clearly doing so without our conscious awareness. So if my soul makes decisions before I'm even aware of them, can I claim free will? Some might say, well, Comrade Ivan, that is perfectly fine. That's the voice that they would use and the face that they would make. That is fine because your soul is still a part of you. Well, that's a valid argument, but what if those decisions are the kind that might have severe consequences? What if I had a soul of a psychopath? Since I would not be aware of the decisions it made for me until after the decision was made, well, right now I feel like such a soul would be like a virus I would like to get rid of. Sam Harris, in his excellent book titled Free Will, specifically talks about this. He says, even if you believe that every human being harbors an immortal soul, the problem of responsibility remains. I cannot take credit for the fact that I do not have a soul of a psychopath. Harris, too, claims that free will is an illusion, but he doesn't just make a bold claim. He actively demonstrates mechanisms by which our thoughts and intentions come from background processes which we are not aware of and over which we exert no conscious control. It's a fascinating read. I really wish I could get into more details from the book, but then this video would be like 2 hours long. I will make one more quote though. He says, "You as a conscious agent are only part of your mind, living at the mercy of other parts. You can do what you decide to do, but you cannot decide what you will decide to do." That's pretty deep, actually. It's much like being a marionette, only rather than pulling on our limbs, the strings really pull on our wants and needs and feelings in a way that makes us want to do what we think we want to do. That is depressing. Isn't there some mechanism by which free will, as we think of it, can be compatible with how our brain operates? As early as the 13th century, a thought started to emerge that free will is so apparent it was proof the universe could not be deterministic. Philosophers who made this claim are called libertarians, no affiliation with the political libertarians of today. Now these folks, they ran the argument in the opposite direction. To them, the existence of free will had to be the starting point. After all, during medieval period, it wasn't all that obvious whether the universe was deterministic or not. but it was pretty darn apparent that we could choose between, say, the word of the Holy Church or the chiropractic adjustment in a torture chamber. So for libertarians of the 13th and later centuries, the free will had to be a starting point. Naturally, when faced with two views of reality that are far extremes from each other, philosophers did what philosophers do. They came up with another extreme view with a better name: compatibilism. Now, compatibilists, that's their name, their game was to appease the two camps by saying that everybody needs to chill the down. There's no issue here. One can have deterministic universe and free will at the same time. Dude. They did this by redefining what constitutes freedom of the will. Modern compatibilism defines free will as a choice made from internal desires and when there's no external preventer to stop us from acting. The fact that desires themselves are a product of determinism is something that compatibilists acknowledge and believe in, but finding it irrelevant. They're really saying that it doesn't make a difference if there is a puppeteer, so as long as marionette loves its strings. If you find this view to be a cop-out, join the club. We have a sandwich. Club sandwich? Get it? Yeah, I know, I write these jokes myself. You might ask what it is that I believe on the topic. Or you may not, but I'll share it anyway. For most of my life, I have never even questioned the existence of free will. It's just not something that you contemplate. But when I first realized that the human mind is as much subject to physical laws as billiard balls, I thought that if I read enough books and listened to enough people who researched the subject and thought really hard, that I would eventually find a loophole which allows free will to exist. But what I found instead is a history of brilliant and contradictory ideas on both sides of the fence, and it spans thousands of years of deep thought and a few decades of actually testing them. Ultimately, I never did find the final answer, and as I researched the subject, I swung hard back and forth several times. My current belief is that freedom of will is an illusion. But that brings up an important question of what to do with people who do horrible things. Can we not hold criminals responsible for their crimes? Should we simply turn a blind eye to the monsters who enjoy torturing people to death on the account that they could not have behaved differently? That question is so uncomfortable to so many of us. It may very well be a reason why some people double down and defend the freedom of will in spite of the evidence to the contrary. Besides, to say that we are delusional when we believe we are being kind to each other because we want to, robs us of our humanity. It becomes easy to argue that if we are collectively to abandon the notion of freedom of will, the idea of justice and the justice system itself would also have to be abolished. After all, wouldn't punishing a murderer, a victim of the state of mind that they're made of, wouldn't that be like punishing the first COVID patient for starting the pandemic? No. If you choose to believe that murderers and rapists and torturers are not morally responsible for their acts, then by the extension of the same logic, the society is equally not responsible for maintaining a justice system that punishes criminal behavior. The public, too, is made of atoms, and those atoms want justice. Besides, no one is saying that we can't make choices. It's pretty clear that our decision-making produces outcomes that are a direct result of the said decision-making. Believe it or not, there actually have been strict scientific experiments to demonstrate that. The argument is that the whole process, the observation of choices, the deliberation, the decision, and the final outcome, that they're all products of underlying processes of which we have no control. Simply put, our choices are not as free as we tend to think they are. Am I firm on this belief? No. As science provides us with new answers, the journey continues. But as far as I'm concerned, this is far more interesting than watching the Kardashians. Thank you for staying curious, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey, stop. Mind if I bribe you? Of course not, you greedy science nerds. Listen, I'll make you a deal. Join me and I'll make your friends envy you for your smarts. I researched a ton of material to get this video out. I read a bunch of books, I sat through lectures on free will and determinism, I talked to experts and general public. It took me an obscene amount of time to put this video together. And you know what? I loved every minute of it, but the only way I can continue to do this is if I earn viewers. You know what I'm asking. If you think I deserve your future views, hit the bell icon when you subscribe, or at the very least, watch another video of mine before you make that decision. The next one, however, is coming up in 2 months, but it answers the age-old question of how long ago the intelligent life had the first opportunity to emerge in the universe. I know there's not a day that goes by that you don't ask that question. Well, it turns out that we can sort of calculate the earliest time a smart alien thought it would be a good idea to probe us. Or more likely to make a spear to get some Vorkat Chedge. Yeah, I know, that's Klingon, alright. Anyway, I don't make videos just to make videos, so you won't get spammed with notifications when you hit the bell icon. You'll get short videos with references to quality sources in the description, about a week or two apart. I'm still feeling out my workload, but they will be filled with cool facts that will make your friends realize what a smart, cool duck you are whenever you open your mouth. And I'll also put out like a really deep dive video like this one once every 2 months or so. See ya.